Hello, everybody, and we are back. That's right, I'm back with more on Horsehead Fantasy Football League with the season in review. I wanted to get this out around the Super Bowl, but one thing led to another. But here we are, anyways, and I'm going to go over what happened this season. I'm going to give the final ultimate rankings for the season, and then yeah, that's basically all it's going to be for this week. So this is going to be the Horsehead Weekly, where once a month I'm going to put out a video from now until probably on the draft, and then I'm going to try to ramp up again, and then once the season starts, you'll be getting them every week. But for now, once a month. So let's get going. And we're going to start off with the regular season standings, just so everybody can get another look at how everyone did during the regular season. We ended up having James take Kathy's Kids, Honey Bunches of Oats take Skullhouse. I believe it was Mike took The Outsiders, and Tyler took The Insiders. So going into the playoffs, it was, there were some definite favorites already. Mostly the two teams coming out of Skullhouse, because those teams both did very, very well during the course of the season. And we're both looking to just continue that run throughout the playoffs. And yeah, so let's see how that ended up going on with the playoff bracket. So as you see on the top, we have the the AFC, and on the bottom the NFC. And in the wild card rounds, we had Jerry play up against James, and despite James putting up a very good number of 130, he fell to Jerry, who then went on to play up against Doug, with the winner moving on. I'm pretty sure we all saw this coming. But surprisingly, just poops all over himself is what Doug does here. And sorry, Doug, but you ended up just looking abysmal. And moving on was Jerry on to the finals. Over in the NFC, the bye went to Tyler, and Mike ended up playing up against, I believe that's Matt M. Mike ended up winning that round to move on to play up against Tyler. And despite putting up the second best score of the week, Mike sadly fell to Tyler, who put up an absolutely disgusting 158, basically saying, look, I'm here to win the championship. And in the Super Bowl, that is exactly what he did, playing up against Jerry and taking him down 123.8 to 106.9. So that's what went on the winners bracket. And in the fight for 50, we ended up having James take the victory. He put up some pretty high points in week 15, and everyone was kind of laughing because he was actually going to be one position out of first place after that week, with Matt M having, or he was actually in 7th at that point, with Matt M having 144 and Dave having 133. But he ended up putting up a pretty respectable 118. I mean, he had two good weeks back to back. Whereas Matt M put up that 144 the first week, and then that second week he really, my math is correct, just needed 110, which was not something that should have been a problem for him. But he only ends up putting up an 81, and that ends up just tanking him. And Malcolm and Nick put up fine scores week 1, bad scores week 2 to knock himself out. And Matt S., James's brother, attempts to keep James in the so close but so far camp, but just can't quite get there, putting up a very valiant 136.7 in what was a very low scoring week 16. I believe it was the highest score in the whole league for that week. And now let's just give a quick review on the incentives. The Eliminator. This is ordered from first to last, so very sorry to Mike, Jess, Dave M, Matt M, myself, Malcolm, Nick, James, Jerry, and Matt S for not even making it to the last week, in which Tyler defeated Doug to take down the Eliminator, making him both the champion of the Eliminator and the champion of the league. But hey, Doug, you won the regular season championship, which is worth something. you did good. But yeah, and then immediately everyone just getting real sad because Tyler, the week immediately following the Eliminator being finished, puts up a 93. So if it was just broke a little bit differently, he probably wouldn't have been the winner. But if week 12 ended up being the final week because one more person survived one more week to change something up a little bit, but oh well. This is really fun still either way. I hope we all bring this back next year. And now looking at other things, quarterbacks and running backs. We've all seen this before. I'm just throwing it up again. Congratulations on Doug for having the best quarterback, Matt S. for the best running backs. For wide receivers, we had Mike, who had the best wide receivers. Tight end, of course, goes to Tyler, who had Gronk throughout the season. And for IDPs, James, Dave M., and Jerry, congratulations to all of you on your incentive victories. And now for the ultimate rankings. And of course, I tried my best to be unbiased with this as I do with all my things. I really did try to figure out the best way to figure out who was the best over the course of the season. So I decided I'd look at 5 different metrics, and then whoever had the most points was the best, the least points was the worst. The first one is the average score. So how many points did you score each game throughout the season? That's pretty simple. Next up is the draft score. If you drafted a great team and you had a bunch of really good steals, all your higher end picks, like your first 2-3 rounds, they all played, they were all starters for the entire season, and then you got like an 8th or 9th round pick that was really great, then you're going to have a high draft score. If you went out and you picked up like just some players who just ended up being trashed throughout the entire season, and you really just were kind of sad watching your team play because, your first, second, and third rounders all hit the waiver wire at a certain point, then you'd have an incredibly low score. And when it came to injuries, I tried to look at how the players performed when they weren't injured. But there's a lot of iffiness with that because like OBJ came back, he had one really bad game, 2 really, really great games, and then he got hurt and he was out for the rest of the season. So would he have kept that pace up, or was it just he was a little bit fresher than everybody else because he was out for a while? I don't know, because we really can't tell what would have happened, but that's the draft score. Transaction score is how well people moved players around. So this is both how well you were doing with trading and also for ad drops. You went out and you picked up this guy, because you're like, oh, he's probably going to be something decent. I'll pick him up anyways, whatever. A la last year, I did that because I was like, I'll pick up this Jordan Howard guy. He's getting a couple more touches. Maybe he'll be good. And then that was the week that whoever was ahead of him went down. That's a really good transaction versus, dropping $50 on somebody who was absolutely just a flash in the pan for a couple weeks. That ends up going against you. Your finishing score, this one's pretty simple again. Where did you finish? First gets the most points, last gets nothing. And then overall score, which was very subjective for me, and I understand that it's probably some people are going to look at it and go, that doesn't make any sense how the overall score for that team is that. But it's just basically how I felt your team performed throughout the season overall. Like how, if you had really low averages, but I thought your team was really good throughout the year, you just were getting unlucky. I don't know. It's just a very subjective thing. So, sorry for the last place team, and as much as I wanted it not to be me, it was me. I couldn't, like, in good conscience, do anything about it. Also, my computer died, as you may know, which is why I missed a week during the regular season. So I don't have PowerPoint anymore because I don't want to pay for that nonsense again. So I'm using other programs, and sometimes they make stuff look ugly. So sorry about that. But yeah, so I had a score of 13. All of my points coming from what I thought was an average draft, maybe a slightly above average draft because I did get like Stephon Diggs late, but I also picked up Mike Gillislee. My first pick was OBJ, who was really good when he played. So I don't know. I just kind of put myself in the middle because I thought that was fair. And even though I had a lot of very bad trades that I made throughout the season, a lot of them were because I would grab somebody up and then they would get injured very shortly thereafter. Like when I traded away Russell Wilson for Deshaun Watson, and then Deshaun Watson went down. So I basically traded the second best quarterback in the league for the best quarterback in the league, and the best quarterback died. So, there's all that. I also traded away Carson Wentz at one point, so I couldn't get myself above average, so I put myself at 7th. I thought that was fine. I scored 102 points per game. I came in 12th, and I mean, really, I couldn't give myself anything better than the last. I know how I did this year. I performed very poorly, and next year I'm hoping I can come back and get back into the playoffs again. Moving up, we have Jess. Jess got 15 points. She had 110 points per game, which was good for 10th. Her draft wasn't very great. If I remember correctly, a couple of her players I just was a little bit baffled at on draft day. And then later on, it kind of bore out that way, looking at some of the stuff that she did. Her transaction score was 9th because, honestly, I wanted to put her at 12th. I did. But I decided 9th is probably fair because some people were, like, actively detrimental to their team, where Jess kind of didn't do that much transacting. She made a couple of trades, and the trades she did make were good. She made good trades when she made them, but I think she only made, like, 2. And then she also finished the season with, like, $35 in her pocket, so, that penalized her a bunch, so putting her at 9th for that. She ended up finishing in 11th, beating me out for the last place trophy. And her overall score, I thought she was about the 8th best team throughout the season. She had a couple of weeks where she was really, really good. And her team looked kind of, like it was a real contender, and she was going to make the playoffs and everything. And she was in that hunt even into that last week where she could have made the playoffs. And she only missed it by, I think, one game broke the wrong way that last week in the playoffs to get into the playoffs, or else she would have got in over Matt. But, so she ended up finishing up with 15 points. So Jess, 11th in the final rankings. And in 10th, we had Malcolm. Pretty sad what's happened between Malcolm and me. The last 2 champions, Malcolm 2015 champion, I was 2016 champion, and now here we are both in the bottom 3. His average score just slightly above mine at 106. I really had trouble breaking the tie for his draft, so I just gave him 7th place. There were a couple people who I thought did, again, they're just meh drafts. Like, they did well, but I don't think they really, like, knocked it out of the park. They didn't hit on every single note. So I just kind of put him in the middle and gave him 6 points for that. His transaction score was 5 points because, he made some good moves, made some bad moves, so I put him in the middle of the road at 7th. He ended up finishing in 10th, which got him 3 points. And overall, I put him at 10th because I feel like he was, low rent for most of the season. I feel like this was one of those seasons where if you had very strong feelings in certain areas, it was very, very easy for you to just not do well. And I think that's what happened to him. He really bought into a couple of players that didn't go well, and he also bought into a lot of things that he was just like, oh man, this guy's going to be great, or this offense is going to turn it around or something, and it just didn't work out for him. So Malcolm finishes in 10th. At 9th, we have James making a big jump up to 26 points. So if I was going to tier this out, which I just probably should have done, the bottom tier was definitely those bottom 3. And then 9th through, I think, 7th or 6th is another very big tier, very long tier, which means that, depending on what day of the week it was, who knows, maybe James, if I looked at his transactions and liked them better, I looked at his draft and I liked it better on a different day, he could have shot up the rankings a bunch just by moving up or down, 2 or 3 spots. But, so let's go through it with him. His average score, he finished 4th with 118 points per game, which was very, very good. This is despite somehow having the 11th, which tied for 11th means he was last in draft score, and his transaction score was 12th. Yeah. So things he did was like trade away good players for players he then immediately dropped. He traded away somebody for Mike Gillislee, and then Mike Gillislee decided to be inactive for the rest of the season because he was bad. He made a couple other trades along those lines. It was just, trading away players that weren't that good for players that were worse. He also spent like a third of his fab on Tariq Cohen, who was good for a couple weeks and then just kind of, trailed off. And during those couple weeks, he was getting bombarded with trades, but he said, nope, this is my guy. I'm hitching my wagon to him. And it didn't end up working out for him that great. He ended up finishing in fifth. He made the playoffs for the first time. 2, he finished in fifth and finished in the money. And I gave him an overall score of fifth. So by no means am I saying that James had a bad season this year. I'm just saying that his draft with things like, all in on Terrell Pryor did not work out for him. Some of the transactions he made just did not work out for him. So I feel like those kind of detracted from him. But overall, his team still performed very, very well. And I think I said this a lot during the season. I have no idea how James's team is doing as well as it's doing and how it managed to do what it did. But God bless him, he got there and he finally won some money. So congratulations, James. You finished in 9th to start out a new tier. And as you can see, that new tier continues with Nick at only 27 points, one above what James had. His average score is 112 points per game. He ended up finishing with the tied for 7th in the draft, which was with, I think, Malcolm and one other person. His transaction score was 3rd because he is trade Nick. If he had a superpower, it would definitely be the ability to talk somebody into something that they then regret. He did a really good job of that this year. Again, like he always tends to do, he makes pretty good trades. I think he got bit a little bit by the injury bug sometimes, which I can definitely relate to this season. But yeah, so he ended up finishing in 3rd. So for the transaction score, which is fine, it's very good. So it's definitely a strong suit. He ended up finishing 9th in the league because he had 2 very underwhelming games during the fight for 50. And his overall score, I put him at 7th. I thought he was a little bit, pretty average throughout the season. He was one of those guys who could win who could beat anyone that wasn't elite at the time, and probably wasn't going to lose to people that weren't good. But up against another average team, it was a coin flip. So I figured, 7th place is probably fine for Nick, who ends up finishing in 8th with a score of 27. Matt M then comes in at 29th. And he had an average score of 119 points per game, putting him at 3rd. But again, just like James, I thought he had a very poor draft, and he didn't do very good at his transactions. And because of these 2 issues, he winds up at 29th. All right, a score of 29 in 7th place. His final score, he ends up finishing at 8th after a great week 1. We all thought, oh, well, that's going to be great for him. He ended up faltering in the second week, putting up a just abysmal score, which means he only gets 5 points for that. But despite the poor drafting and the poor transactions, I still thought that he had one of those teams throughout the season that whenever you would look at it, you'd be like, yeah, no, this is a player that can 100% win any game. And, he won a lot. And honestly, he was one decent game from the money. And he actually, I think he was pretty close up against Mike in the playoffs too. Like, he was only off by, a couple points of making it into the next round. So Matt ends up finishing in 7th. Next up, we have Dave. So, the brothers just kind of hanging out. And I didn't mean for this to happen. But somehow he ends up finishing with 6 points in literally all the categories. Some of the categories I started out, and this was stuff I did like in an Excel spreadsheet somewhere, while making all the categories, and then looking at all the data, and then ranking them, and figuring out how everyone stands. And then when I put it in the PowerPoint, I'm like, that's ridiculous. So he ends up with 30 points. Again, only like 4 points ahead of 9th place James. So again, a very tight pack tier there, or maybe it was 7 points, something like that. Very, very tight pack tier though. So yeah, his average score is 117 points per game, good for 6th. He was in that little scrum there, tied for 7th with, I believe it was Nick and also Jess, maybe. I don't remember at this point. But he had an average draft, average transactions. He ends up finishing in 7th, which was good, not great. Doesn't earn any money, but being right around the middle of the pack is fine for your first season, especially in a league as crazy as this. When he was still trying to figure out, like, This isn't your normal league. This is a league where people trade like crazy, people go nuts over transactions. People are really putting in the work, and I think he definitely held his own in this league for his first year. So congratulations to Dave on that. And I think he had an overall score of 6 because he was again, he was a very average team this year. And for your first year in this league, having yourself be average, suits you very well moving forward, because that means that over the next couple of seasons, you're only going to get better once you figure out how to deal with people, how to make trades, how to work the draft. Things where it's like we wait very, very long on quarterbacks and we go very running back heavy despite being half PPR. Like, those are just a couple of things in the draft that you're going to realize next year going in, when you're like, oh, that's right, everyone loves to take running backs early, and people also wait a long time on quarterback. And also when you're drafting, think to yourself, oh, well, if I pick this person up, I can definitely trade him to Nick. Stuff like that. So, great job, Dave, and much success moving forward for you, I would assume, if you decide to come back, because I'm you're on probation, but you did well. Now we have the next tier starting, which is the 2 teams tied for 4th, and I believe the team in 3rd place. So starting off with first here, we have Matt S., who finished with 118 points per game, which is good for the 5th best. His draft score, I thought he had the best draft. Honestly, he had an absolutely fantastic draft. If you go back and look at it, he picked up like Gurley in the 2nd round, and he picked up a couple other people later on that were just absolutely phenomenal. I should have had my notes on a second pad or something like that, but I'm kind of just doing this off the top of my head. Fantastic draft. He made some really good trades too. Did some really good stuff. Made some very good not trades too. I know a lot of people were probably trying to scoop up like Todd Gurley early on in the season when they saw how good he was running, and just being like, hey, maybe I can pick him up for someone who's not as good right now and hope he buys in on the future, and then I can help Gurley keep it up. Kept denying those trades, kept saying, nope, I want to keep this guy. I drafted him. I'm going to make good things happen, and he did, putting him in 4th for transactions. He ends up finishing in 6th, very, very close to catching up to his brother there at the end, as we saw in the fight for 50, just a couple points short. And then his overall score, so despite 5th average, 1st draft, and 4th transaction, I really didn't ever love his team. It's weird. I know I'm not entirely sure where I got that 11th from when I was working on this, but I don't know. I just kind of was looking at his team throughout the season, seeing how he was interacting with other teams and what he was doing and how he was playing, and I just kind of wasn't really feeling it. I feel like he had a decent average score. He did good in the draft and everything like that, but when it comes down to it, when you're in a league like this, you need to win games. And during the regular season, he didn't do a lot of that. I think he only had, it was 4-9, or at best 5-8. Like, he was not very good this season. But you know what? Clearly, I was wrong, because when I look at the rest of the statistics, he ends up finishing tied for 4th with Mike. Mike, who ends up coming in 4th, winning the first round to knock my M down in the playoffs, and then losing to Tyler, the eventual champion, and then losing to Doug in the 3rd, 4th decider, who was the regular season champ. So, can't really look down on yourself that badly when you lose to the champion and the regular season champion as your 2 losses in the playoffs. I mean, you had a really good season this year, Mike. So your average score was only 8th best at 113 points per game. Your draft score, I thought you had a slightly above average draft. I like some of the things that you were doing. So I'm just going to leave that because I don't exactly remember again. Probably should have looked this stuff up more. Your transactions, though, I really did like a lot of the trades you were doing, a lot of the work you were doing with people. I thought you made some really good deals, and you were, a lot of fun to talk to and just try to like, okay, let's try to make a deal. What can we do? What can we do? I really did enjoy making trades and deals with you this year. You ended up finishing in fourth, and overall, I thought your team was a little bit underwhelming throughout the season, but you managed to get there. You ended up, despite putting up the 8th best points per game, coming in fourth on the season. Not entirely sure how you managed that. I don't know if you just, when you had bad games, they were just really bad, or if you just spiked up against the right people, or you had an easy schedule. I don't know, but you did very good, and you were tied for fourth, just behind Doug at 39 points. Doug ended up finishing with 114 points per game, putting him in seventh for that. And then, as you can see, he was just a real solid addition to the league this year. He had the 4th best draft, in my opinion. He was 5th best in transactions. He finished in 3rd. And I think overall, he just was, a very above average player this year. And again, like I was saying on Dave's slide, this is one of those things where it's a tough league. And after this first season and learning all those little things you picked up on, I think you can definitely make some moves going forward next year and maybe try to take over the league as the champion because you did win the regular season, or maybe you'll just kind of trickle out and have a bad year. Maybe you'll just stay steady. Who knows? But you learned a bunch this year, so I'm expecting better things from you, Doug. That means you have to do better than 3rd. So congratulations on making the finals next season. If we are really losing Tyler, which would suck and I would hate, but if that's what's happening, then yeah, I feel like Doug could definitely be one of those people who shifts gears and ratchets up into that upper echelon with, like your Jerrys and other perennial powerhouses. Next up, speaking of that, we have Jerry, who's in a tier all by himself in 2nd place at 45 points. Absolutely smashed it this year. I thought he had the best overall, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. His average score throughout the season was 121 points per game, which was good for 2nd. His draft score, I thought he had the 3rd best draft. Every pick he was doing, and even the trades he was making throughout the draft, I thought all were really good. Even though he did kind of, he traded away Melvin Gordon, who ended up finishing top 10, for Julio Jones, who wasn't great. He still made do with that, and that didn't hurt him enough. I think that's the reason he's in 3rd, not higher up, though. But he did do some really great stuff in the draft. His transactions, though, that was his one weakness this year. Really didn't like a lot of the, the little trades he was making, a lot of the ad drops he was making. They ended up working out for him. He finished in 2nd place. He went to the finals, and he ended up having my top overall score. Just really not a fan of some of the moves that he was making and the way he was going about improving his team after the draft. Which means, of course, the winner is Tyler. 126 points per game, a good 5 points clear of Jerry, 10 points clear of most teams. Really can't argue with that. And it's all based on a fantastic draft, followed up by a flurry of trades over the course of, I think, 2 days is what it was, where he took his team from, yeah, that's a team that can make the playoffs, to, oh, that's a team that might win the championship, to, that's a team that should win the championship. And from there, he just, like everything in this game, he got a little bit lucky here and there, dodging some injuries, trading away some people, at some good times, but he absolutely crushed it with a great transaction score. He ended up winning the league, coming 1st place, and despite all of that, I put him in 3rd just because I thought that I really liked what Jerry was doing, and I forget who I had in 2nd place. I think it was Matt M. I really liked the stuff that he was doing too with his team, but all in all, Tyler ends up coming in 1st place in the league, and he goes out on top of my ultimate rankings. So, congratulations, Tyler. And if you are gone, you will be missed. Yeah, that is it for this week. And I will see you all next month. Next month is March, so that means we're going to be ramping up to the draft. So, I don't know, maybe I'll do something fun with that. I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do. I do know that in June and July, what I will be doing, June will definitely be picking teams for the World Cup. So if you have any ideas as to how I can go about doing that, please feel free to let me know in Slack. And if you have any way you want me to cover it, if you want me to do something, a little sillier, a little more fun, because I'll be a lot freer in July once, all the legislatures go home for the year because I only work 6 months out of the year. Maybe I can do something more fun with the World Cup than just make a video at the end of it. Who knows? But yeah, so best of luck to everybody in your individual teams coming up in the draft. Hopefully your scouts see some great people in the combine and everything like that. And I will see you guys in March. So thank you guys for watching, and bye.